She steps into the marble-floored lobby as if she belongs, though the doorman's eyes twitch with disbelief, and a stiff hand blocks her path. She's soaked from the downpour outside, clutching a sagging floral purse, and wearing a long, tattered coat, patched with mismatched fabric, the hem brushing against her worn slippers as if trying to hide them from the glaring opulence of the five-star Belhurst Grand. Rainwater pools around her feet glistening beneath chandeliers like a cruel joke, and a concierge with perfect teeth and a clipped accent is already motioning security with a whisper, thin as thread. We have a situation near the main entrance, and the woman somewhere between 70 and 80 small, and stooped but with a proud set to her shoulders, simply says, "I'm here to check in, dear," in a voice as soft as memory, yet firm as marble. Her gray curls flattened under a faded green hat, and her eyes the pale blue of winter sky, unblinking under the weight of 100 watching stares. She is Eleanor Mayburn, a retired librarian, former civil rights activist, and widow of a late decorated judge, now a grandmother of 4 and silent patron of more than a dozen charities under pseudonyms no one knows. But here, in this gleaming temple of the wealthy, she is just an unwanted intrusion, a misfit in their curated perfection, a wrinkle in their starched white sheets of class. "Ma'am," the assistant manager says, forcing a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, "perhaps you're looking for the community shelter on 11th. They have warm meals and—" But Eleanor lifts one trembling hand and with surprising steadiness replies, "I have a reservation under Mayburn," her voice cutting through the patronizing air like a violin string under pressure, and the silence that follows is long and sharp, broken only by the clicking of the manager's manicured fingers on his tablet, until his smirk falters, and he murmurs, I see as if someone just slapped him with a truth he hadn't studied for. But damage done is hard to undo." Whispers ripple through the staff. A bellhop chuckles as he fakes a bow. 2 maids shake their heads and giggle behind manicured nails. And when Eleanor is shown to her suite, yes, the penthouse overlooking the entire city skyline, it is with forced politeness and tight smiles. Not hospitality, but obligation, as though the hotel itself resents her presence. In the room, as dusk rolls across the windows and soft lights come alive, she sits quietly on the edge of a chaise lounge, fingers brushing the velvet cushion like an echo of a memory. She can't voice and watches the city below its noise, its pride, its hidden griefs, and recalls a day in 1967 when she was dragged from a counter for asking to be served coffee in Selma, the day she promised herself she would outlive the cruelty of those moments and walk with dignity no matter how long the road. She came here not for luxury, but for proof that even when draped in rags, dignity can still walk into marble palaces and demand to be seen proof for her granddaughter, who cried in her arms last week after being mocked for her second-hand shoes. Proof for herself that age and class cannot erase worth. The next morning, she enters the breakfast hall, still in her patchwork coat, drawing sneers from guests in pressed linen and silk, one woman even hissing under breath. Honestly, it's disgraceful. Letting that in here, to which Eleanor, now sipping tea with a hint of a smile, replies gently, "Good morning, dear. I like your pearls. My husband bought me a pair like those before he passed." And silence falls again, like rain on glass. Something in her tone too calm, too knowing. It's not until the staff receives the call from the regional hotel board that their faces begin to change the anonymous donor who has funded the Belhurst Scholarship for Underprivileged Youth, who financed the children's cancer wing at St. Mary's Hospital, and who sponsors the city's annual homeless shelter gala, is staying at the hotel for a personal retreat and would like to remain incognito. But the name attached to the file, the one connected to the transfer of funds from a private trust established 32 years ago, is Mayburn Holdings, and with it, an attached note. Please treat all guests, no matter their attire or status, as you would want your own mother treated. Panic blooms behind the concierge's eyes. The manager turns pale and stammers as he orders apologies to be made, and Eleanor simply continues stirring her tea, adding a spoonful of honey, while across the room the same maid who snickered yesterday now bows deeply, voice trembling with a desperate, "I'm so sorry, ma'am," but Eleanor doesn't gloat, doesn't rise to scold or parade her power. She merely looks up those glacier eyes warming for just a moment and says, "It's not me you owe. It's every woman you looked through because of her shoes. Every child you turned away because of his coat." And she stands folding her napkin with grace as the chandelier above her sends fractured light, dancing around her figure like a crown. No one gave, but life itself earned. She leaves that afternoon without fanfare, her coat still flapping behind her like the banner of some quiet revolution. And by the time the press gets wind of the incident, it is too late. Photos leak of the homeless grandma sipping tea in the penthouse, sitting beside a world-famous author laughing with a young violin prodigy she sponsored from the streets. And the hotel releases a carefully worded statement about renewed sensitivity training and inclusive excellence. But the real lesson spreads in whispers through the hearts of those who watched her, and lingers in the trembling hands of a receptionist who now holds the door a little longer, and a bellboy who apologizes before assuming, and a waitress who places an extra croissant on a poor man's plate the next morning without charging him, because somewhere out there in a world obsessed with packaging and polish, an old woman in a tattered coat reminded them that kindness, dignity, and greatness never need to be worn on the outside to be real, and the most powerful people are often the quietest souls watching from the corners, waiting not for attention, but for a moment to make others see. That evening, as the sun dips behind the skyline, and the Bellhurst Grand basks in the fading gold of twilight, Eleanor walks alone through the neighborhood park 3 blocks away, her coat trailing softly across gravel paths worn down by time and footsteps. Children play on rusted swings, a mother hushes a baby on a weathered bench, and pigeons flutter in the dying light. But few recognize the woman who just hours ago left behind a scandal, echoing through the hotel's marble corridors like ghostly thunder. She stops beneath a tree whose branches bend with the age she carries in her bones, and sits beside a man whose face is sun-darkened, his hands calloused, his shoes split open at the toes. He nods at her, not in recognition, but in that quiet way the invisible greet each other with shared understanding that asks no questions and offers no judgments. "You been to that big hotel up the street?" he asks, not knowing who she is, only sensing the faint scent of jasmine still clinging to her scarf, the way her eyes seem too wise to be poor. She smiles. "Yes." "Spent the night?" He chuckles dryly. "Bet they ain't let you through the front, huh?" She sips from her thermos tea, warm and sweet. They tried not to. But sometimes we have to remind them who really owns the world. He squints, the rich. She shakes her head slowly. No, those who remember how to be human. Word of Eleanor's story spreads further than anyone expects. Not through headlines, though some tabloids toy with it, but through whispers, videos taken by a housekeeper who secretly admired her, then uploaded to a community blog where her grace, her silence, her simple confrontation with prejudice becomes legend. In youth shelters across the city, social workers replay the story to teens who've given up pointing to her image like a lantern in the dark. See her, they say. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She just showed up with truth. A week later, Eleanor receives a letter from a high school girl named Lanny, writing from a foster home in Queens. Dear Mrs. Mayburn, I saw your story. They say you walked in looking like me. And they treated you like me, but you walked out like a queen. I've never seen someone like me do that before. Now, I believe I can too. And something in Eleanor shifts not pride, but purpose. She pulls out the old satchel where her husband once kept courthouse notes and fills it with letters like Laney's notes from homeless shelters, from waitresses, from even a few hotel staff who apologize not with excuses but sincerity. The world doesn't change overnight, but Eleanor becomes something more than herself. A symbol quietly passed along street corners, charity dinners, and classroom discussions. She begins attending civic meetings, showing up unannounced to council forums where policies threaten to reduce shelter funding. And when they scoff at the woman in the coat, she hands them copies of donation receipts all in her name. Some laugh, some protest, but others begin to listen. At the Bellhurst, the suite she once stayed in is unofficially dubbed the Mayburn Room by staff, and though management resists at first, eventually they lean into it, offering it to single mothers for free weekends, housing scholarship applicants during interviews, hosting a monthly dinner for the homeless in its lounge. Not because they were pressured, but because they were watched. Because Eleanor made them see, and one rainy morning, months later, she walks once more past the doorman who once blocked her. This time he bows deeply and opens the door with a whispered, "Welcome home, Mrs. Mayburn." And without hesitation, Eleanor steps through not to prove anything, but to remind the world again, a soul dressed in dignity never goes out of fashion. 3 years pass, and the world turns as it always does, faster for the powerful, slower for the forgotten. But Eleanor Mayburn remains steady like a lighthouse. No storm could shake until one autumn morning when she does not rise from her bed. The sun filters gently through the sheer curtains of her modest apartment, above the old library, falling across a small stack of handwritten letters beside her. One from her granddaughter, one from a former hotel bellboy now managing a youth shelter, and one from Lonnie, who's just received her full-ride scholarship to Columbia University. Eleanor lies still, her hands folded neatly over her chest, eyes closed as if in peaceful conversation with the wind. She leaves no will, no list of instructions, only a note scrawled in her careful slanted hand and pinned to the wall with a rusted hairpin. Carry it forward, quietly, kindly, unapologetically. News of her passing spreads like a hush across the city. At first, just among those who knew her. The librarians, the street vendors, the janitors she had remembered by name. But then the story reemerges in the public consciousness, like a buried root breaking through pavement. Articles appear with titles like "The Lady in the Coat Who Changed Hospitality" and "How Eleanor Mayburn" quietly redefined class. And soon the Bellhurst Grand holds a memorial in the very penthouse she once occupied, now officially renamed the Eleanor Suite. Its walls adorned not with oil paintings of nobility, but framed letters from the people she helped, the lives she changed. The lobby fills with an impossible mix of guests that day. CEOs standing beside waitresses, city officials beside unhoused elders. a young violinist who once played for Eleanor, now performing a mournful rendition of Clair de Lune, while tears streak down his cheeks. Her granddaughter delivers the eulogy, her voice trembling but clear. My grandmother believed that how we treat people who look like they have nothing shows whether we have anything worth keeping. She wore a torn coat but carried a heart stitched from justice. And she made this city see what we've been blind to. I carry her strength in my spine. I carry her silence in my breath. After the ceremony, they unveil a bronze statue outside the hotel, not of Eleanor in a grand dress or polished heels, but exactly as she was that first day, small, dignified, wrapped in her old coat, one hand holding a weathered purse, the other outstretched slightly. Not begging, not demanding, just reminding the world to see. The plaque beneath reads, "She walked in." Truth, may we always open the door. And that night, in shelters across the city, volunteers share hot meals in her honor. A child named Maya is given a worn coat by a quiet old man who once served her tea. A security guard at a different hotel stops a colleague from ejecting an elderly woman, and instead offers her coffee. Change doesn't roar. It echoes. Somewhere in the rustle of leaves and the hush between footsteps, Eleanor still walks unseen, but deeply felt whispering to each of us the same quiet command. Look again. Love anyway. Lonnie stands on the stage of Columbia University's commencement ceremony, a sea of robes and caps stretching before her. But her eyes are focused only on the folded piece of paper in her trembling hand. The one she wrote the night before, the one she almost couldn't finish because the memories hurt too much and meant too much. She clears her throat, her voice caught between pride and grief, and begins. 3 years ago, I was just another girl in a foster home, just another name on a long list of forgotten youth. And then I read about a woman in a patchwork coat who walked into the most expensive hotel in the city and reminded them all what dignity looks like. Her name was Eleanor Mayburn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flash her wealth. She just walked in like she belonged, and the world had to catch up. Her voice steadies, growing stronger. She wrote me back. She told me that power isn't what you wear or how much you own. It's how you carry pain with grace, how you treat people when no one's watching. I never met her in person, but she changed the course of my life. And now I promise to spend my life changing the course of others. Applause erupts, but Lonnie doesn't hear it. Her eyes have drifted up to the sky, soft and blue and infinite. And in that moment, she swears she feels a quiet presence sitting in the front row, watching, smiling, still wrapped in that same torn coat. Lonnie graduates top of her class with degrees in social policy and urban planning. She turns down high-paying corporate offers and instead accepts a position running a nonprofit in the heart of the same district where Eleanor first made headlines. The building she chooses was once a luxury boutique abandoned after bankruptcy, but now bears a new sign: the Mayburn Center for Dignity and Access. Its mission is clear and unflinching: to restore visibility to the invisible, to treat every visitor, housed or unhoused, rich or poor, with the same respect Eleanor once demanded, with just a smile and a room key. And the center thrives. Not because it's funded, though donors come in droves once they hear Eleanor's story, but because of the way it feels. Warm lights, real voices. The smell of bread baking in the kitchen each morning. Lonnie personally trains each volunteer, ending every session with the same line: They might come in wearing rags, but you'll learn the richest people carry wealth you'll never see. Years later, a little girl with missing teeth and tangled braids asks Lonnie, "Why's there a statue of a grandma at the front?" And Lonnie smiles, kneels, and says softly, "Because that grandma once taught the whole city how to love again." And every year, on the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, the center holds an open tea hour. No press, no speeches, just a quiet gathering of people sitting beside each other. Doctors, beside janitors, teachers, beside the formerly incarcerated CEOs, beside children. Each guest is offered tea in mismatched porcelain cups, and every cup has a word painted inside: grace, courage, dignity, love. And somewhere through the rustling of coats and the steam rising from chipped teacups, there's always the unmistakable whisper of Eleanor's legacy, still walking, still watching, still reminding the world that power is never what you show, it's what you choose to give. It begins one rainy Thursday morning, as they often do in Eleanor's city, with the sky weeping soft silver and the scent of wet concrete rising from the streets. Lonnie, now in her 30s, poised yet humble, wearing a simple gray sweater and the same soft scarf Eleanor once gifted her by mail, stands at the front desk of the Mayburn Center, reviewing housing requests when the front doors creak open. And in steps a boy no older than 13, barefoot, soaked through, clutching a plastic bag like it holds his entire life. His name is Jalen. He says nothing, just stares wary and wordless the way children learn to do when the world has failed them too many times in too few years. His skin is olive brown, his face, narrow eyes, huge and hollow, framed by unbrushed curls matted from the rain. Laney kneels to meet him at eye level, not to interrogate, but to welcome. "You're safe now," she whispers and leads him into warmth. That night, he eats 3 full plates of lentil soup without saying a word, then falls asleep on a donated cot in the corner, with his hand still gripping the plastic bag. Over the next weeks, Lonnie watches Jalen the way Eleanor once watched her, not with pity, but with belief. She learns pieces of his story, not through words, but through drawings. He scribbles on scrap paper, a bus with no wheels, a house split in 2, a boy standing alone beneath a gray sky. He doesn't speak for almost a month until one morning. While folding his blanket, he looks up and mumbles, "Do you think people ever stop leaving?" Lonnie doesn't answer with platitudes. She sits beside him and says, "Not everyone. Some people come back, some stay." He looks at her, long and quiet, and something in him loosens. Lonnie arranges for Jalen to meet a trauma-informed art therapist. He starts painting every wall of the center's lower level, soon blossoms with his work. Wild streaks of color, aching images of shadow and light, and eventually portraits of strangers of kindness of one elderly woman in a coat standing alone at a hotel's revolving door. When Lonnie asks how he knew about Eleanor, Jalen shrugs and says, "I saw her statue. She looked like she knew me." Months pass. Jalen smiles now, talks tutors other kids in math, volunteers to sweep the entryway every morning. One day he stands at the front doors holding them open for a woman wrapped in a tarp and mutters under his breath, "You're safe now." Lonnie watches from her office window, tears softening the corners of her eyes. Years later, Jalen speaks at his high school graduation. He wears a worn gray scarf and his first real suit. He begins, "They called me invisible, but someone saw me. someone reminded me that being seen is the beginning of being saved. I was saved by Eleanor Mayburn, by a center she built, and by a woman named Lonnie, who reminded me that silence is not the end of my story. When he finishes, the crowd rises, not in polite applause, but in deep, rising affirmation. Lanny stands at the edge, hands folded, remembering Eleanor's final words. Carry it forward, quietly, kindly, unapologetically, and she smiles because she knows Jalen will. Years pass, and the world continues its restless spinning. But inside the heart of the city, the Mayburn Center stands quietly stronger than ever. No longer just a shelter, but a movement rooted in warmth, dignity, and truth. Jalen, now 26 tall, and lean, his hair tied back in a simple knot, and his voice calm but commanding, walks the same halls he once slept in as a child. The scarf Eleanor once gifted Lonnie now rests around his shoulders, faded, but precious, worn only on days that matter. And today matters, because today the City Council is voting to approve a development plan that will demolish 5 blocks of low-income housing, including the street just behind the Mayburn Center, to build a luxury tower and urban revitalization park. Jalen, now director of the center, sits in a gray suit before the council, but his hands are steady. His voice, when he speaks, doesn't shake. You call this revitalization, he says slowly, eyes scanning the room. But you're burying the very people who made this city breathe. Some on the council look away. Others smirk. A developer in a pressed suit chuckles. With all due respect, Mr. King, that land is wasted on crime and vagrants. Jalen leans forward. With all due respect, sir, that land raised me. A pause. The room stills. I was one of those vagrants. And now I'm the director of the most successful outreach center in this city. Not because I was saved, but because someone believed I was already worth saving. Behind him, the room is packed residents from shelters, artists, teachers, youth workers, and dozens of people who once stood exactly where Jalen did. And one by one they rise. A woman with a cane, a boy in a suit, an elderly man wearing a coat that looks suspiciously like Eleanor's. They each hold one word painted on signs: home. The council pauses the vote. They call a recess, but the press is already outside. The photo that runs the next morning shows Jalen in the center of the crowd, head high, hand outstretched not in anger but in offering, and the headline reads, "The boy who once slept on a shelter floor now stands for thousands." 2 weeks later, the development project is halted. The city announces a new partnership with the Mayburn Center as lead consultants on inclusive housing reform. Jalen doesn't celebrate with champagne. He walks to the statue of Eleanor Brushes, a leaf from her shoulder, sits beneath her bronze gaze and quietly says, "I did it. Miss Mayburn, I kept the door open and the wind stirs." Soft, knowing, as if somewhere she is still watching. It begins on a cold November night, the kind that wraps the city in wind sharp enough to make even the proud lower their heads. And Jalen is locking the front doors of the Mayburn Center when he sees her standing across the street beneath the flickering light of a broken lamp post alone, arms crossed tightly over a beige cashmere coat that doesn't quite hide the tremble in her shoulders. She looks out of place here, too polished, too clean, too familiar. Jalen narrows his eyes. The woman's hair is tied in a sleek bun. Her heels scuffed but expensive, and her face, though smudged with fatigue, is unmistakable. Her name is Evelyn Hardwick, CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm, keynote speaker at global conferences, and the very woman who once testified against the city's housing reform bills Jalen helped pass. She was the face of corporate resistance, the polished opposition. And now she looks broken. Ms. Hardwick. Jalen calls, gently approaching. She flinches, almost turns to run, but something in her collapses and she whispers, I didn't know where else to go. Inside, she won't meet his eyes. She sits on the same cot Jalen once called home hands, clutching a crumpled paper for closure. Notice. Legal threats, medical bills, they cut me out of my own company. She says in a voice barely louder than the ticking wall clock. Rumors, scandals. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't cruel. She pauses. Maybe I was blind. Jalen listens in silence, offering no judgment, just tea, warm bread, a blanket. She breaks down, not because she's cold, but because kindness for the first time in months doesn't ask for anything in return. Word of her disappearance hits the media within days, but the center holds no press conferences. Jalen shields her identity, introduces her only as Evie to the volunteers, and something strange begins to happen. Evelyn starts sweeping floors, serving soup, listening, watching. One night, she stands before the Eleanor statue and whispers, I spent my life building towers. You built a door. Weeks turn into months. She begins designing a digital tool. The Mayburn Map, a platform to connect at-risk individuals with food. Shelter legal aid in real time. Coded by Evelyn, guided by Jalen, named for Eleanor. When the city discovers Evelyn has been staying at the center, scandal explodes, but not the way people expect. Because instead of hiding, Evelyn steps into the light beside Jalen and says at a press event, The world I helped build only served the few. The world that saved me serves everyone. The press calls it a redemption arc. But Evelyn doesn't care about headlines anymore. She cares about the line forming outside the center each morning, and whether the water boiler works, and whether that little boy from the shelter likes the oatmeal she learned to cook. Later that year, she donates her entire golden parachute severance to the expansion of the center, but only under one condition. No plaque, no name, just build more doors. Jalen smiles. Eleanor would have liked you. He says. Evelyn exhales a laugh, tears glinting. I wish I'd met her. Jalen shakes his head. You did, every time someone was seen instead of judged. Every time someone opened a door without asking why. And so, in the middle of the city, once again, the story flips. The powerful find refuge. The forgotten rise. And at the heart of it all, the Mayburn Center glows. Not with lights, but with something older and stronger than power. Compassion that refuses to compromise. Spring arrives not with fanfare, but with quiet persistence. Buds blooming through sidewalk cracks, the scent of wet stone mixing with jasmine. And at the heart of the city, the Mayburn Center hums with a deeper energy. Inside the main hall, Jalen and Evelyn stand before a small audience, not of donors or cameras, but of city representatives from Atlanta, Oakland, Detroit, New Orleans. They've come not to visit the center, but to study it. The Mayburn model has taken root beyond Eleanor's city, an idea once too simple to be profitable and too kind to be scalable is now being whispered across state lines as the future of social care. Evelyn, dressed in denim and sneakers, no longer the steel-heeled executive, but something softer and infinitely more powerful gestures to the digital wall, where the Mayburn map glows live. You don't solve homelessness by building walls. You solve it by creating systems that ask not, what do you cost, but what do you need? She glances at Jalen, who smiles faintly. And then you stay. By summer, the first out-of-state Mayburn Center opens in Oakland, then another in Atlanta. Each one begins not with a ribbon cutting, but with a circle of people sitting together. Shelter residents, volunteers, ex-convicts, doctors, teachers sharing stories and deciding together how to serve their city. No hierarchy, no saviors. Just humans with different tools. Evelyn and Jalen travel not as founders, but as mentors, passing on what they've learned, that dignity is not a service, it's a structure, that redemption is not rare, it's rarely offered, that no one is too broken to rebuild. A year later, they're invited to speak before the United States Congress. Jalen hesitates. "We're not politicians," he says. Evelyn smiles. "No, we're the ones cleaning up after them." On the day of their testimony, they don't present spreadsheets. They bring people. Lonnie returns now, leading Mayburn southeast. Jalen's former art therapist speaks holding one of his childhood drawings. A mother who gave birth at the center's clinic stands proudly with her son, now 5 years old. And when Evelyn steps to the microphone, she says only one sentence. "Power is not what you build above others. It's what you build beside them." Applause erupts. But real change begins the next morning when senators walk into their offices to find printed notes taped on their chairs. Carry it forward, quietly, kindly, unapologetically. No signature, just Eleanor's words. And so, the Mayburn movement grows not as a brand, but as a rhythm. In laundromats, where volunteers offer mental health check-ins. In libraries that house single parents overnight. In bus stations turned community hubs. In the quiet, in the overlooked, in the rooms no one thinks to visit Eleanor's revolution lives on. Not as history, but as policy, as practice, as proof. One night, back in the original Mayburn Center, Jalen and Evelyn sit beneath Eleanor's statue in silence. The city hums beyond the windows. Evelyn sips tea from a chipped cup. Jalen glances over and murmurs, "Do you think she knew it would become this?" Evelyn looks up at the bronze face, then whispers, "I think she knew it had to." And somewhere beyond time, beyond fame, beyond titles or wealth, a woman in a threadbare coat smiles, not because the world finally saw her, but because the world finally saw itself. Decades pass, and the skyline changes. Glass towers rise, electric buses hum silently through widened streets, and holographic ads blink above corners where once the forgotten huddled. But in the heart of the city, untouched by trend or tech, still stands the original Mayburn Center. Its brick facade ivy-wrapped, its wooden doors creaking proudly. Its courtyard garden blooming each springs with wildflowers planted by the first children it ever sheltered. Inside, a new voice echoes through the atrium. Not Jalen's nor Evelyn's, but a young woman with warm amber skin. Tight curls tied back with a faded gray scarf and eyes as steady as a mountain stream. Her name is Nora King Mayburn. Jalen's daughter by adoption, legacy by fire. She is 32, trained in architecture, but her blueprints are not for buildings. They are for rebuilding people. Today, she speaks before a new crowd: students, young activists, urban planners, mayors from cities on other continents. "We don't build shelters anymore," she says calmly. "We build belonging." Behind her is a new installation, the Living Map. An evolution of Evelyn's Mayburn map, now powered by AI, updated in real time, by community hands, accessible by anyone everywhere. No passwords, no payment, just needs and answers. Jalen, now silver-haired but upright, watches from the side. He no longer leads but listens. Evelyn, slowed by age but sharper than ever, sits in her wheelchair beneath Eleanor's statue fingers, interlaced, a single tear rolling down her cheek as Nora continues. This center was once an idea, then a refuge, then a movement, and now it is a promise that no matter who you are, where you come from, or how far you've fallen, someone will see you. Someone will open the door. When the speech ends, a quiet descends. No applause, just breath, just awe. Nora steps down, walks over to Jalen, and hugs him tightly. "Did I do it right?" she asks softly. He nods. "You did it better." Evelyn reaches for her hand. "The world we tried to imagine, you're living it." And as the sun begins to set, casting golden light across the engraved words below, Eleanor's statue, she walked in. Truth. May we always open the door. A new name is carved gently into the stone below it beside the old ones. Jalen King, Evelyn Hardwick, Nora King Mayburn. 3 names, 3 eras, 1 legacy. Outside the center that evening, a boy no older than 10 sits alone on the steps, clutching a torn bag. His shoes soaked from the rain. Before he can knock the doors open wide, and Nora herself steps out, kneels down, and says with a smile passed from lifetimes before her, "You're safe now." The world doesn't remember Eleanor Mayburn because she was loud. It remembers her because she was right, because she believed even in silence that dignity wasn't something earned through wealth or granted by status, it was inherent. And from a single woman in a tattered coat standing in the lobby of a luxury hotel, a movement was born, one that traveled through generations across cities and continents, passed from Eleanor to Lonnie, from Jalen to Evelyn, and finally to Nora, each one carrying not just the name, but the purpose. Now, in a world brighter than the one Eleanor first stood in, her legacy lives in the simplest, most human of acts. A hand reaching out, a door held open, a child being seen, a stranger being named family. Because when compassion is handed down like a torch unlit by ego, undimmed by time, it never dies. It becomes eternal.